Hello, hello, and welcome to week 4 of our free course of Funerary Archaeology. This is lesson 10. I want to thank you all for your kindness, for your advice, for your comments. Please keep in touch, continue to do so, because your comments are very much appreciated. So thank you all. If there is someone new, someone who has interest in the subject, please be aware that this course is free and is still available because all the lessons that are streamed at the time are now visible on the playlist on this channel. And also, if you prefer, if you want, you can enroll in Google Classroom for having much more material and having the possibility doing so, passing tests and quizzes to be eligible for a certificate of participation for this course. So thank you all. I see that there are some people coming. Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm only showing some comments. Hello, hi. So today's lesson is an introduction of funerary burials and practice. And so by giving this lesson, my aim is to have a quick review of all that we have talked about in the previous weeks, and also to lay new grounds for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, new lessons. So shall we start? Hello, hi everybody. Hello all. I'm seeing new comments, new people are coming. So, shall we begin? At first, the very first thing that we will focus on today will be the term burial. What we mean by it. The term burial in Western society is commonly referred to the act of disposing the corpse, and generally with the word burials, we talk at inhumation and interment. Those are our first thoughts. But we also have to remember there are a plethora, many other ways to dispose of a dead body. One of them is also cremation. Only inhumation and interment, they are for certain society, particularly in Western society, they are the most common one, and they are only a small part of which the dead are removed from the living. There are plenty of information that archaeologists can retrieve for burials. For example, some of them we focused on in previous lessons are information that can be linked and extrapolated from the body of the deceased, the bones, such as pathology of the once living person, and the growth, the economy, subsistence, diet, even the form of the past society treated, healed, or people with some form of disease. But at the same time, there are also, and we have to be aware of it, that there are a vast majority of data that we missed and we are incapable of retrieve. Burials are linked to the social context in which they are formed. As I said in one of the earliest lessons, funerals are generally a political act, and so they bring significant meaning with them. So I see that there are a lot of comments. Do you hear me well? And oh, hi everybody, hello all. There are some problems with the audio or the video. Let me know, because sometimes my computer froze, so I wanna check in if everything is right. So let me know. Okay. So shall we continue? I hope this goes well. So, as I said, that funerary practice are linked to the social context, and by that I mean that many times in past society, the process and the choices that are underlined by burials, which are in fact the deposits that are carefully prepared, could have taken to the living months and years of planning. Let's think, for example, one of the easiest example possible, the pyramids. So this is a programmed action that the ancient Egyptians do for their king, the pharaoh. And burials are the final rest place of the dead. But we are to remember that past society funerals, probably, we cannot say with certainty, but there is a high level of certainty and of probability that past society funerals didn't share the same feeling of gravity, of gravitas, that we are accustomed to. For example, they could have a procession with some sort of dances, of mourning songs and music, and a feast after the funeral, banquets, and so on. So when we refer to the burial, the first thing that we have to consider is, of course, the grave. The grave is intended to be the place where the dead are finally placed for their eternal rest, and the shape and the depth of the grave could be also related to social status or gender of the dead, or could have also echoed other contexts, such as the shape of the architecture of the grave could be one of a miniature house of the dead, or could be enclosed in a sort of a storage unit, or could also be a part of a sacrificial rite. Some example, the shape of the grave could be a huge tumulus, or could be a grave of bigger, a burial, an interment of bigger dimension compared to other graves of the same cemetery, of the same necropolis, as we mentioned in past lessons. That's the correct name. Referring to past society cemeteries, they are also referred as necropolis. So the shape of the grave itself could be linked to the particular high level social status of the deceased, of the singular deceased, such as, for example, the chief of a specific clan, specific tribe, or it could be the grave of a clan, of a family of importance in that particular society. Usually when we found that massive grave, which could be not massive in its richness intended in the richness of the grave good, but could be richness into the proportion compared to other grave that are smaller in proportion, and if we could use a sort of a modern term, minimalism, compared to it. They also have a lot of grave good, and we will see some example. And they could be also located in some sort of upper prominent place in the necropolis area. It could be some sort of artificial or natural hill in which the tomb of the deceased could overlooked to the other member of his community, could be part of a storage unit for some society. A way of burying their dead is to bury it beneath their home, beneath their houses, close to the place where they lived, where they shared their normal life. For example, there are examples of child burials that happen in the surrounding area, external to the house where the parents lived, on the outer perimeter of the area of the house, which is deputed to room. So the children could rest close to their family, to the closed one. Also, the grave could not be visible, could be a part of a sacrifice rite. Let's say, for example, the one of the bog bodies in the bogs in the northern part of Europe, Germany, Scandinavia, in which there is not a proper grave. There is not a pit or some sort of hole in the ground or some sort of monument and building on the outside of the ground, up on the ground itself, but simply the grave is made up by the bog itself, and the people which were chosen for the sacrifice, for the human sacrifice, they are buried with, or buried, not the correct word. They are placed, when they died, in the same place of the rite, where the rite happened, surrounding, surrounding by grave goods of any kind, and we will see that later. So we have to remember that funerary practices are linked to subsistence, building, and also dwelling. Also, another thing which is important is the orientation of both the grave and the body. And for all the religions on earth that are linked to some sort of rite of death, in which the burial is a part, an important part, a so-called main rite of that burial practice. For example, the grave and or the body have a specific orientation, a specific position, which is very, very important. For example, the Muslim burials have the head of their deceased always facing the Mecca. So it doesn't matter which place in the globe the dead are placed. If we look in the map, their head is always facing towards the Mecca. For instance, Christian burials always laid west, east, and the head of the dead are facing west, because in that way, for the Christian mythology, they could face God, which eventually will rise up on east on the day of judgment, on the day of the resurrection of our bodies. Or the grave could be linked to cosmological myth, for example, the pyramids that are linked to certain constellation. And also for the Vikings burials, they share the same underlining way of placing the grave and the body. So the grave is of course made by the body itself, and the body, as any other kind of artifact or elements which is comprised into the grave, could be arranged in different positions. Could be laid simply on its back, could be laying on one of its sides, could be laying prone, which means with the face down, not to the face up, could have his face put slightly up or down, could have his legs and arms bent or crossed to some degree, or can even be put tightly, as much tight as possible, as to the knee will reach the point of the chin of the deceased. Also, all these changes are very important, not only for a different type of thought, of rite that underline each choice. We spoke about the prone deposition some lesson ago, which was usually preferred to the individuals of a specific community, which are considered evil, that are punished for certain reason. For example, because that individual committed a crime, or was some individual linked to evil forces, and that recognize the thought about dark magic, which underline that deposition, or could be at the end of a sacrifice for the same reasons. Also, we have to acknowledge that each small difference into the position of arms and legs may be linked to one specific clan, family group in that necropolis. So each family could have its own form of preference of the position and position of the body. So it is also, as you can see, very important for regaining that information. The body generally does not go by itself. It has some sort of grave good. One grave good that we all are accustomed to nowadays are the deposition of flowers. Flowers are linked, even in past society, to rebirth and to certain gods. So they held a very specific meaning. Even the type of flower itself have a specific meaning, or the color of the petals of the flower have a specific meaning. Grave goods are also associated with the body, and they can be objects that were once possession of the dead, personal possession, or they can be a mourning gift of the living to the dead, as the flowers, as I was mentioning before. Or they can also be everything that the dead will need in the afterlife. It could be everything that remember the now living part of the community, the character, the persona of that specific person, and can be generally divided into some categories, which are clothing and related equipment, containers, remains of food and drinks. Also, another thing to be very aware of is that archaeologists, or everyone that is dealing with a grave, need to separate the culture on the body, which means, for example, the clothing, or the shroud, or the wrapping, from the material culture on the body, which could be some sort of body adornment, could be flower necklaces, shell necklaces, necklaces and jewelry in general made up of various materials, from the very humble one, as I was mentioning before, flower and shells, to gold and metal in general. Also adornment of the clothing itself, for example, pins, or part of a belt, the buckle of a belt. So something that the clothing requires for be taking place in its position. And we have to also distinguish from the material culture, which is placed off the body, such as, for example, sword and some sort of all the materials which are pertinent to the warriors' apparatus, even materials which are pertinent to horses. So everything that lays outside of the body. We often overimposed our own category towards them on past artifact. We try to read the past deposition with our modern eyes, but we have to be aware of that. For example, one of the very easiest and quickest example that everyone in the academical field is making is the one of body, which are placed in the burial together with the sword. Sometimes that sword could be linked to warriors. So our initial thought when we see a dead body, a dead skeleton with a sword, is that of a warrior or someone which held a particular prestigious and high level in the welfare of that community, in that organization, that society. But for certain culture, for example, there are some examples from the Aegean world. There are female bodies that are linked to sword and knives. And that is because they were priestesses. So their artifacts of materials that are placed near the body are a representation of their role in that specific society. Also for the men in the German world, it was very common to have some sort of body adornment, such as jewelry, such as earrings, while nowadays it's commonly accepted that even though thankfully nowadays we are more open, but generally for the majority of people, body jewelry are linked tightly with female, not male. So we have to be aware of that. So, as I was mentioning, people of the past provided their dead with items that were considered appropriate for the context of the dead and their society. Also, another form, and we can see here what I was mentioning before. These are examples taken from a necropolis of Bronze Age in the northern part of Italy. And this is a deposition of a male, in that case, warrior, because the anatomical analysis, biological analysis of the skeleton confirmed that the deceased was once a man, was placed with a sword close together to his left hand, and that sword was probably some part of his family heritage, some part of the object that characterized itself, its social role into society. For example, we are so accustomed to see nowadays businessmen travel with their small luggage. So we have to consider it was just the same for past society. Or, I don't know, chef with their hat, white hat, and they dresses, and so on. But also, it could mean that that specific individual earned its role in the society because of its act during a war, and by so the sword is just a reminder of the act that he showed during the time of need. Here we can see a female burial from the same necropolis. The items that are underlined by numbers are a part of the clothing, probably, of the deceased. There are different type of pins. Also, the position of those pins, as you can see here and here, this is a disc. Probably it was a sort of embellishment of a necklace or headpiece that during the decomposition of the soft tissue fall here. And that specific items also show the role of that female in their intricate, elaborate way for the time, because you can see they have a two spiral from the head of the pin, and this is not something made for a functional purpose, because to hold the clothes together, only a pin, a very common long pin as a needle is needed. So everything that is a sort of ornament of that specific artifact is made to show the richness and the importance of that person which possess the item itself. Usually in the archaeological records, the burials of a female are the richest, and they show the richness and the value of the family in which they were part of, while the objects that were found in male burials are linked to the social and political status of themselves and or their family. Also, pin, if that is the case, or some sort of belt, are linked not only to the wealth and the richness of a family, but are linked to the provenance of an individual, because pins are needed to held together thin clothes which are made of wool, linen, cotton, all natural fibers, while in the northern part of Europe, as we can see here, when there is a much rigid climate, so thin clothing are not the case, given that there is not the cultivation of that plant which could give the fiber, such as linen or cotton, but also there is even wool is something which is imported and was something considered a wealth object, a wealth possession. So in the northern climate of our world, we witness that during almost the same time, this is Bronze Age, that is Hevged girl, which is also happened in the Scandinavian Bronze Age, the clothing was pretty much different, because as we can see in the reconstruction here, there are not pins. There is a huge disc decorating the belt of that female body, which was closed with that belt, the ribbon belt, leather belt, but the clothing itself was made of very coarse, very durable, and weaved different type of wool pieces and also leather. So by the retrieval of pins, we could witness that this body is pertinent to someone who lived to some more hotter climate, warmer climate. And that specific climate, the dresses were made of a very piece of clothing, which could be rectangular or square, which is wrapped around the body and held together with pins and knuckles and other strings that probably perish, and we did not have any residue or any information about them. If that specific string were not embellished with some sort of metal or the other much more durable material. Also, the deposition of that specific woman was pretty much important, because you can see it was not laid on the bare ground, but she was laid on a trunk, wooden trunk, and on the top of a wooden trunk there is fur, and she was pretty much well preserved. We can see here close up of the hair of the woman, and also the clothing were pretty much just as the same as the time in which they were deposed. There is also a small object. As I was saying before, the grave goods are concerning not only the statue or the status of a person, the level they had in their society, but also they are a family heritage or a personal possession, a representation of that disease. And comb is one of that personal possession, and it was placed near the head. As we can see here, there are some sort of potsherd, of pots in general, right at the end of the body, both foot and head. And the deposition of a pottery or some sort of food or a drinking container was held there, was placed there for cultural and rites that happened at the time of the deposition. It was pretty much common in past society to consume, to eat and drink during funerals. Also some sort of small part of food or some specific food or wine or some sort of beverage are placed into the tomb to be with the dead at their necessity for afterlife, some sort of nourishment, but also for the dead to be ready to take an offer to afterlife deities that he may encounter. And it will be a ritual of inclusion during a time of a year where the living part of a community gather themselves in a specific part of a necropolis or in all the necropolis for a ceremony to be closed where they remember their dead, but could also be a rite of separation to give everything that the dead people will need in their afterlife, and so it's the very last contact with the living. On the same level, there are the deposition of broken objects, broken or torn or bented objects. In that case, there are spears and blades. And these also have a very strong meaning and could be part of a ritual of inclusion. We living people acknowledge your courage, your bravity during an act of war, and we broke all of your possession, so no one could take your position in our society, or they are broken as a form of offerings to a deity, very specific deity, the god or the goddess of war, depends. And so there could be a separation of the seed from the living one. We broke, we we made that specific object that are very valuable, which are in metal, and in past society the possession of metal object was a huge thing, because there was not farms and production as there is nowadays, but were made by figure of people which are very expertise in their subject, their making, who traveled around the areas where they find out the material, or they could sell their works. So they were very much expensive, and the possession of a metal object was considered per se a level of status. So they brought that personal object because it's another form of underlying that people will not, the one who died will not come back. So no one is gonna need it. And so they bent and they buried with the dead body. Also, as I was mentioning before, another part of grave goods could be made up of wrapping or shroud of some sort. This is also linked not only to the ceremony, to the ritual in which the body was taken and placed into the burial itself, but it could also be linked to a way of preserving the body, to isolate the body of all that is around it, and so it can underline a sort of importance of that specific deceased, compared to other ones of that same necropolis, if it did not show sign of a wrapping. So this is only a very short excursus, a very short basic introduction of burials and all that they can show us, and the type of burials and the type of materials that we can encounter in the burials. And for more example, from classical society, I'll see you all in next week. Next lesson tomorrow. So have a nice day and see you tomorrow.